and welcome to the video. It's not what the seller is selling, it's what the buyer is buying. Just like you need to know your customer in your everyday life, you also need to understand your buyer as a customer and understand that in order to get a premium valuation. In this video, we're going to walk through different types of buyer motivations, their fears, and what they think that they're actually buying, which might be different than what you think that you're selling. We're going to talk about the hardest part of selling your business. We're going to talk about the second hardest part about selling your business. And then finally, we're going to talk about what are the 3 questions that you're going to need a yes from the buyer in order to get a yes to doing the transaction. Let's get started. I think that it's not what the seller is selling, it's what the buyer is buying might just be the most important concept I've learned in over 20 years since my first acquisition. And the reason is because whenever you start to feel that a deal is off track, come back to this principle. You'll probably notice that there's a split between what you think you're selling to them and what they think that they're buying in some aspect of the negotiation that's throwing it off. I'll give you an example. I'm selling my Amazon business in the pet accessories niche. Pretty simple, right? If I'm the seller. But what the buyer might be buying is this. I'm rolling up undercapitalized niche brands in emotional markets where influencers can extend my reach into the 30 to 55-year-old female head of household wallet audience, where I have a series of high-ticket recurring revenue products in beauty and supplements, but where direct advertising costs have gotten too high. Do you see the difference there? Your brand, what you think is 100% of the equation, may only just be a piece of what the buyer is buying. And unless you understand the full picture, it's almost impossible to negotiate a premium valuation. So I'll start with what's the hardest thing to do in selling your business. And that is simply the ability to generate the belief in yourself that you can actually do it. In terms of sellers, and I've talked with hundreds if not thousands of sellers, and I still get oftentimes people fearful that they're not going to be able to exit their company. And the reality is in e-commerce, as long as you're profitable, there's almost an exit for everyone. It might not be at the dollars that you want, but there is an exit out there for you. So the first step in is rewiring your mindset to when I exit, not if I exit. But the second hardest thing is often overlooked. And I'll tell you what it's not. It's not presenting the story of the company. It's not negotiating the offer. It's not even due diligence or trying to get the deal closed. The hardest thing to do in selling your business is having the ability to focus first on how to help the buyer get what they want and then focus on how you get what you want. And we'll take a look at this to get an illustration of it. You have to think of your ultimate buyer as your ultimate customer, because they're the one that's ultimately going to pay you the most. In essence, they're buying all of your products rather than just one of them. And just like a customer, they tend to buy emotionally and justify their decisions rationally. And that means you need to think in terms of emotional benefits and emotional ability to reduce their purchasing risk. I often use this example because I think it really helps capture the point. So here's what a typical Amazon seller might do on their listing. As you can see, it's a nice listing, and if I was to list out in their eyes of reducing risk and buyer benefits, let's take a look at it. Okay, I've got American made, I've got 100% Turkish cotton, I've got extra large, and I've got hotel quality. All of those types of things are designed to help reduce the perceived risk of you, the person who's looking to buy the towel set, right? Now let's take a look at some of the benefits. It's got soft linen, and as they saw how important that is, it's actually repeated twice. It's got absorbent, meaning that it's going to get you really, really dry. Its extra large size could be a benefit and or a reduced risk, depending on how you look at it. And it's got quick dry to say that, hey, it's not going to hang there. So when you think about this listing, it's pretty good. In addition, on the right side, it's got free returns and it's got free delivery. So they've got some additional benefits there, and they've even gotten secure transaction. So we're looking at this listing, and now that's how you list your business. Let's take a look at it when you're trying to sell your business, and we're going to convert this listing to what the typical seller does when they're trying to sell their business. Let's start with the title. Pay me a big multiple, guaranteed, even if it goes bad for you. Pay me up front because I want the money now so I can invest it outside of you. Let me get out quickly, even though you have to stay in long term. Hey, good luck. But we both know I won't really care then. But don't worry, I'll write you from the beach. You see my point? And, oh, by the way, the price isn't $46, it's $4.6 million. And there's no returns. And I'm only going to offer short-term support only. How did we do reducing risk for the buyer? We basically did this. Me first, me first, me first, me first. And in terms of buyer benefits, we basically said, I don't really know, and I don't really care to help you. So when you're thinking about putting together your listing or your offer for a business, or even going into the negotiation, as you can see, the further are that you look like this second listing when you go into the negotiations, the less likely you're going to have a conversion. Just the same way that you wouldn't do that with a customer, don't do that with your potential buyer because they are your ultimate customer. So the first thing that is hardest now, because you now believe that you can sell your business, is going to be the ability to keep this in mind throughout the process. The ability to focus first on help the buyer get what they want and then focus on how to get what you want rather than the other way around. But as I like to say to people all the time, you're going to be tested multiple times throughout the deal to adopt this mentality. But always remember that you hold the ultimate key to getting what you want, or else you can just choose to not do the deal. I'll give a quick example. We had a seller that wanted to leave within 6 months of selling their business, but the buyers that we had at the table were a lot of larger buyers because it was a large FBA business, and they were looking at keeping on the sellers for a year or 2 years at a minimum. We didn't come back and push back on it right away. We got down to the final selection criteria, and ultimately what we did is we said, okay, we understand that you want us to be on for a year. Let's do it in 2 different ways. Let's do it in 2 different ways where we start out doing full-time for 6 months, and then we'll back off to part-time. And by the time we got down to the end of the agreement, the part-time was the second 6 months at 4 hours a week, which then our seller was more than happy to accept. But if we'd let in there and said we want to leave within 6 months, not only would we have maybe have lost the buyer, but we would have negotiated on that point to the expense of not getting a premium valuation. Okay, we're going to now shift. Once you've got that mentality in mind and we're thinking like a buyer, let's talk about the 3 questions that you need in order to get to a yes. And you'll notice the last question is probably the most important. I was taught this by my mentor, Terry, and I always like this analogy. The first question is, what are you asking me to believe? What's really the fundamental investment proposition that's going on here? And as I like to call it in economic terms, it's what is the base forecast? The second question is, how bad do I have to believe it? Do I have to believe a lot of things have to happen in order for this to go well? Or, in other words, how different is the base forecast going forward from today's reality? And finally, the most important question, what if I don't believe you? If everything doesn't go as planned, what happens in the business? Or in other words, what's the worst case scenario? And is there a 0 case out there where I could lose all of my money? You need to be able to answer these 3 questions, and they really apply to almost every deal that's out there. Why do they work so well? Because they're phrased in human terms, because ultimately that's what your buyer is. You're asking them to believe in you, and you're asking them to believe in your company on a go-forward basis. And so you need to be able to spell out what it is that you're really asking them to believe. The second thing is that there's multiple layers in order to get a yes in each circle. You first have to think about the overall strategy. You have to think about the financial layer. You have to think about the risk assessment that you're doing. And ultimately, that allows a buyer to go, is this pretty close to believing what's going to normally happen? Or do I have to believe something extra is going to happen in order to buy this company? And then finally, understanding the buyer's definition of the downside case is the foundation upon which your deal is going to be built on. And I always like to think of it in terms of your buyer has career risk at stake if your account, for example, gets shut down, or if you have a patent infringement or some major thing happens to the business. So we need to be able to answer that question most importantly before they can think about the good things that are going to happen. So let's use a few examples. Here's a normal business asking for a normal multiple. What are you asking me to believe? I'm asking you to believe reasonable growth. Our current products will continue on a success trajectory. You're going to be able to double the product rollout because you've got more capital. And you've got expertise in Europe, which will probably drive an additional 10 to 15% growth. How bad do I have to believe it? Yeah, not too much. If the current products succeed and the rollout continues, I'm going to get a 30% return. Now remember, this is the buyer crafting this language. And I know I've got European expertise already, and I know these SKUs already fit. So I've already got some bump built into the system. And what if I don't believe it is, sales will be slower, it'll be stable, but the return will still be there. It's in a market where I'm probably not going to lose everything. And if I'm only paying a 4x multiple with even a reasonable amount of growth, I'm going to get paid back within 3 years. And finally, I've structured the deal with stabilization payments to hedge my downside risk. Now let's look at a premium one. I'm asking you to believe that high growth is going to continue, which means I have to believe there's a repeated ability to roll out products. I've got to believe there's a team in place to be able to do that. And I got to believe that you are staying on and are going to be experts in that niche to make it happen. I better believe it, because if Amazon changes the rules or some other thing happens, growth might slow down, or if competition comes in, margins may slip. And what if I don't believe it? Well, if I'm paying a 6x multiple for this business and all of a sudden it goes to zero growth, I might not get my money back out for 6 to 8 years. And I may roll some equity to reduce the cash impact, but that's also impacting my yield. And finally, the marketing tactics on this business look a little bit light gray, and that could cause a situation if Amazon tightens the reins where I might not be able to run things better, or I might get shut down. So do you see how answering these questions really gives you insight into how a buyer is viewing your business? The benefits of this approach are it's going to force you to think from the lens of the buyer because you're crafting the story consciously thinking of them. You're going to start to then know when you're starting to ask for a stretch. If you can't feel confident about the answers to these questions, you'll know that maybe you're asking for too high of a multiple, or maybe you're exiting at the wrong time. And you're going to start to consider the most important question that they have early on in your exit process so that you can mitigate the risks of your business, and that will put you on a path to a premium valuation. So I'd like you to complete your first 3 questions exercise. You've probably never done this before. So picture yourself, maybe not at today's point if you're not ready to exit. Pick the desired exit point of your business. Write down the 3 questions and then write how you would answer them. Let's say you're going to exit in a year from now. Write what the answers will be as of a year from now, where you want to be. And then go back to that "what if I don't believe you" question and write down all of the ways that a buyer could feel that the worst case scenario is going to happen, because that'll often be the plan for how you're going to mitigate risk and improve the business before you go to market. And if you're not ready to do it from an exit standpoint, the 3 questions exercise is a great thing for running the business because it applies to almost any negotiating situation that you might be in now. It applies to supplier negotiations. If you're bringing on a business partner, whatever it happens to be, if you can't answer those 3 questions, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get a deal completed. So the action item is complete the 3 questions exercise and then think about how this is going to affect your negotiations going forward. The path to a premium exit has as much to do with showing minimal downside. That's the key lesson from this video, i.e. question 3, as it does with the excitement of showing how great things could be. But many people, when they get into an exit situation, they want to keep emphasizing that at question 1 is even more likely to happen rather than setting the foundation in rock and answering question 3 first and then building the house upon that solid foundation. Okay, so in this video, you've gotten the understanding of how buyers think about things, how they look to mitigate risk, and by helping them understand answers to the 3 questions, you'll have more productive conversations, you'll think from the buyer's lens, and you'll be starting to implement. It's not what the seller is selling, it's what the buyer is buying. Thank you.